Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today at one of my favourite fisheries, Shearsby Valley fisheries in South Leicestershire. Now this venue often gets dominated by hard pellet fishing once the water warms up, and I'm here today to give you my top tips on making the most of that tactic. So first things first, let's talk to you about location and the rig I'm going to use. We face a pretty typical snake lake scenario. It's 14.5 metres to the far side. The far margin is really shallow, it's only about a foot deep, and in the summer months the fish are climbing over themselves to get into that shallow water. This time of year, where the water's still a little bit cool, those fish drop down that shelf and they don't want to go in that shallow water. It's not warm enough yet. So what I've done today is I've plumbed up and I've found a depth. I've set my float at 2.5, 3 foot deep, and I've found that depth, a nice flat area of the peg at that depth. It's slightly to my left today, which is great. Means I'll be able to hold my pole a lot easier because it's a little bit swirly, the wind is. Now, rig-wise, because like I say, the water's still pretty cool, those fish aren't actively, aggressively feeding, they aren't causing a lot of movement under the water when they come into the swim. I'm using quite a light float. I'm using a 4x12 float in 3 foot of water. Now in the summer months that would probably change to a 4x14s or even a 4x16s float to get some weight down and keep the bait still, but while the water temperature is still cool, we can use a lighter float. Because I'm using a hard pellet as bait, probably a 6mm or even an 8mm pellet today, they're quite a heavy bait, so to that end I need to use quite a thick bristle. I've got a 2mm cane tipped float, wire stem. I always like wire stems, they just make the float a little bit more stable in the water. Main line is 016, nice robust main line, never going to let me down. Just while we're at this end, talk about the elastic. This is a really light hollow elastic. This is orange hydro. You can foul hook a lot of fish using this method, it's just the nature of the beast. So with a light elastic, it just means that I might get the odd one in, whereas with a heavy elastic I'd probably pull out of it. Down to the business end, I've got a little bulk of shot that I'll probably string out. There you go, 5 number 10 stots there, and I'll probably just string them out over the space of maybe 6 or 7 inch, just to give a little bit more movement through the water and aid that pellet just to sink a little bit slower. I've got an 8-inch hook length of 012 down to a size 18. That's a Drennan carp rigger hook, tied knotless knot with a little band on the end. And obviously in that band I'll just slip a hard pellet hook bait. So there you go, there's the rig. Now let's talk about the bait. So let's talk about bait. I've got 3 different size pellets with me today. I've got 6mm. This is what I plan to fish most of the session on really. I plan to feed these and fish one of these in the band as a hook bait. Just standard 6mm carp pellets. A lot of the fisheries now insist on carp pellets being used. I don't see a problem with that. Next up is some 4mm. I'm only going to use these as hook bait. I'm just going to maybe place one in the band if I start catching a few F1s. He's stocked a few F1s and I know that F1s have got a smaller mouth, they sometimes prefer a smaller pellet. So a 4mm in the band might just fool a few of them. And if I feel that later on in the session I've either fed a bit too much bait or I get quite a few fish in the peg and I want a heavier bait, a nice target bait for fish to home in on, I've got with me some 8mm. I don't plan to feed any of these, but I've got them in reserve as a hook bait. They're on the subs bench, and if I do encounter any of those problems I'll just slip one of these in the band, hopefully catch some bigger fish later on in the day. One thing I will mention is the type of pellet you use. Obviously we're trying to catch on the bottom today. I don't want any light bait pulling fish up in the water. I want to pin my fish on the bottom where they're easy to catch. So that means using a heavy pellet, a nice dense pellet. You seem to get 2 types of pellets now, a very grainy light coloured pellet and a very sort of smooth, elongated, heavy, dense pellet, and they're the ones I'm using today. They sink like bricks, they make fishing so much easier when you're fishing on the bottom, but obviously if I was fishing shallow I'd probably use the other type. Now to make them sink even faster, to make them even more user friendly, what I've done is I've just soaked a few in some oil. This is a halibut pellet oil. I know fish like halibut pellets, so I've just used that sort of oil, but you can get oil from the supermarket, vegetable oil will do, even hemp oil. You can buy hemp oil. I know a lot of specimen carp anglers use hemp oil on the pellets. All I'd like to do, give the pellets a quick squirt, probably 2 or 3 days before a session. They'll last. This actually preserves them a little bit as well. Give the pellets a quick squirt, swizz them around in the bait tub. It'll soak up that oil. Those pellets will soak up that oil. Maybe the next day, another quick squirt, let them soak up the oil again, and all of a sudden you'll end up with a pellet that doesn't break down once it goes into the water. It makes the pellet much more user friendly. If you were to take one of these pellets out of the bag, ship it out, it will look perfect. But after 2-3 minutes in the water, you'll bring it out and it will be slightly furry. It would have broken down around the edges. It will have gone slightly paler in colour, and that just doesn't happen with these oiled up pellets. So there you go, quite a simple bait selection really, but by using that oil, it just adds something special to your bait, maybe something different to those anglers around you. So my way of thinking, there's 2 ways of feeding the swim. Firstly is with a little pole mounted pot, fill up the pot, ship out, shake a few pellets really accurately over where you're fishing. The next way is to break out the catapult, fire a few over the top, make a bit of noise, create a bit of activity in the swim. What I like to do is combine those 2 methods of feeding. So initially I'll ship out, I'm just going to fill this pot up, 5 or 6 pellets in there. Initially what I'll do is I'll just ship out, shake a few pellets in, and I'll probably do that 2 or 3 times, and then if I don't get a response, I'll break out the catapult, start flicking in 2 and 3 pellets over the top, try and just make something happen. You know, bait falling through the water, hitting the surface, it can always spark a few fish into feeding. So I'll get out to where I'm fishing, just shake 2 or 3 pellets in. I've actually modified this pot just so that 2 or 3 pellets will fall out. I've just put a cross of elastic over the top, so 2 or 3 pellets will fall out each time I tap the pole. Now I can lower the rig directly over the top. Hopefully we'll get a bite pretty quickly. Fish see pellets all the time now, every single day, so they're really tuned into them. They're tuned into the smell, and especially the noise they make on the surface. There you go. Bite straight away. One of the most important aspects for me when I'm hard pellet fishing is making a bit of noise. So, like now, the fishing's just gone a little bit iffy. So what I'm going to do is just start tapping my pellets in from quite a height. Makes more noise on the surface and just draws more fish into the swim. That noise alerts fish that it's feeding time. It rings the dinner gong. They're so used and so switched on to searching for bait and used to these hard pellets hitting the water's surface that it really does turn them on. The next thing I like to do, especially if I feel like I've overfed the peg, is just make a bit of noise with my actual hook bait. So what I'll do is maybe drop it on the surface a few times, make a bit of noise, slap the rig around a couple of times. Even though I'm fishing sort of 3 foot deep, not really fishing very shallow, it still can alert fish to your hook bait. Means that I'm not feeding loads of bait either over the top, but I'm getting the same response. So there you go, I'm going to carry on fishing, hopefully catch a few fish. Hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.